What is going on? My name is Michael Hacker, and this is the Hacker Outdoors podcast. This is episode number 1, Man in a Boat, with tournament angler and all-around good guy Joey McCormick. I split this conversation into 2 parts, with the second part being posted next week. I do hope you enjoyed this as much as we did recording it, and without further ado, let's jump right in it. Joey, thanks for joining us today, man.
Anytime, Mike.
Appreciate it. I was thinking, I was at the supermarket earlier and I was cracking up. I'm driving there and I look over at the car next to me and this guy's wearing a face mask and all alone in the car. And it was funny. It reminded me of the early days of this whole situation, right? And kind of no one wanted to leave the house, even going out in the wilds of the wilds of their neighborhoods or go for walks. And I remember posting a story on my Instagram because I've never stopped going outside, and I never stopped doing the things that I loved anyway, outside of jiu-jitsu for the most part. And I posted a story about me fishing, and I was doing trout fishing in some small streams just to kind of stay away from the crowds because I hate them to begin with. Nothing to really do with COVID or anything. And someone responded to my story and goes, how dare you? You need to think about people and, worry about other people. And it's very selfish of you to be out there fishing. So, I was all alone, probably 10 square miles, no one else anywhere near this stream. And I had probably the best spring and summer in my fishing life. And I've never had fishing conditions like this before. So I want to talk to you a little bit about fishing and, what it is you've been up to, what it is you do. And, we tell, I guess, a few stories to us about your life on the tournaments circuit. And if you want to kick it off, give us a little bit about your background.
Yep. Well, Joe McCormick, Mike's cousin, Joey, Joseph, whatever you want to call me as. About a year ago, I started fishing the FLW BFLs and the ABAs, the American Bass Angler Association. Been fishing pretty much my whole life. And that's pretty much all I do right now is fish.
That's kind of the dream though, right?
Yeah, just like you, the spring here, I live by a reservoir that's a couple minutes, from my house, maybe 2 minutes, and they wanted to open up because of COVID. So, that's the main place I fish because it's so close, or I'll fish the Potomac or the Upper Chesapeake. But I couldn't get out in the reservoir. They would not open it to people, because the fish could get COVID, I guess. And we missed the spring, which is usually, the spawn time and great time to fish. And that's when the bass are the biggest and, they're on their beds. We missed all that. And unfortunately, what ended up happening when they did open, these reservoirs and stuff, they were so packed with people because, they weren't working. People who never fished before. The reservoir would maybe have 30 to 100 people come through a day, 100 if at the most, and went from that to 600. Just really clogged the smaller bodies of water up with everybody being off work. But it is what it is.
And we saw that too, right? So I was a man with a boat this year, as I like to put it. Right, you kind of egged me on to get something, and Donna and I bought a used canoe. It was very hard to come by, and it's my first time really doing boating fishing on my own, regardless of what the vessel would be. And it was amazing going to some of these lakes here in New Jersey and just crowds of people and day trippers, people that were just out there sunbathing and trying to, I guess, enjoy nature in some way, shape, or form, which is good in a way. But
pleasure boaters and those pleasure campers out there, just crowds the waters and
right. So we'll come back to that, I think. But so tell us a little bit about how you got into fishing, specifically bass fishing, and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the tour.
So growing up, I don't know if a lot of people remember, I'm 39, born in 1981. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, I believe it's ESPN2 on Saturday mornings would have fishing shows on, like Bill Dance or so on and so on. And I grew up watching those, really wanting to fish. And at that time, we didn't have the internet. And where I live, I had no idea how you became a tournament angler, or let alone a pro angler. That was more down south. People I spoke to or I speak to who live down there, that's just something they grow up fishing local tournaments and things like that. My father owned a business and was very busy, and he wasn't really a fisherman. He was really into it. So he would take me out when he could, but I guess early teens, my aunt married a gentleman named Ron, and they live up in northwestern Pennsylvania on the Allegheny, and he was a big time fisherman up there, and he really expanded my knowledge and grew my love for it, especially the smallmouth fishing, and showed me a lot of the stuff I still use today. And from there, it grew. And then, I don't know, about 3-4 years ago, my buddy Brennan, he fishes the BFLs down in South Carolina, and he told me about them. And that was really the first time I knew that existed, that BFL circuit for guys who were trying to enter, the fishing scene. And I held off a little bit. I probably should have started earlier. And then last year I entered 2 tournaments, and I'm immediately addicted. Yeah. And it's just grown from there. It's something, once you fish your first tournament, it just gets in your blood, and that's all you want to do. Yeah. You're fishing, which is something you love, and then you add that competitive nature to it. It's just insane. It's hard to describe. Our season right now is done in the Northeast for the BFLs, and I'm chomping at the bit to start again.
Now, if you wanted to, could you travel to different areas?
Yeah, so there's a Toyota series, which I think I'm going to enter a couple of events, the Southern Series this year. I think they start in January in Florida. I think the first one's on Toho, if I'm correct, and I'm going to enter a couple of those. There's a little bit of travel, but I'm going to do it. I have a smaller tournament, an open tournament I'm going to fish up here in about a week or so. Just like a local club. They have open tournaments, which will be fun. But I do plan on fishing down south this summer. This winter.
Yeah, and, I found it interesting. You had brought it to my attention. I knew, just like you, we're about the same age, right? We grew up together. We didn't really fish growing up when we were together. We would go down to your stream down the street from you and pick up crawfish or crayfish, whatever the heck they were. And that was the extent of it. I fished with my grandfather growing up on my father's side, and that was always ocean fishing. Never really did, lake and river fishing, except sporadically when we were camping, and I was never really good at it. But you opened my eyes to a whole new way of fishing, and I've kind of taken that and I mashed it. I'm a big fly fisherman, as you know, and you love to make fun of me for that. But it is incredibly fun to catch smallmouth bass, and it's something that I don't know. Growing up, you never heard about people fishing for bass. It was always specific fish in the ocean. You heard about people doing shark fishing or marlin fishing and sail fishing that way, but never anything else. And it was kind of cool to see that it's evolved. You came up here and fished with me a couple times, and New Jersey is spectacular for fishing, in my opinion, and anything outdoors.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that New Jersey, they think New Jersey, they think,
hey, Ranger.
Yeah, they think New York City, they think real urban. They don't realize, there's a lot of lakes up there, and it's real pretty, out there in the Northwest and even down south. I know Mike Iaconelli, he lives near Jersey, I think over the Pennsylvania side, and fish Jersey a lot. It's just a lot of people don't realize how much nature's in Jersey.
Yeah, it's interesting. And one thing too, I wanted to touch on before we got into kind of fishing stories. So I was unaware that you could be in a tournament and not have a boat. So I think that's like the big gap for people, right? With, when you talk about wealth distribution, and fishing tends to be, especially tournament fishing, like you have to have money in order to get into tournament fishing. But I was unaware that you didn't have to have a boat. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
So the past year, I'm co-angling. So the way it works in a tournament, 150 boats, let's say, and each boat has the boater and the co.
Yeah.
The boaters compete against the other boaters, and the co-anglers compete against other co-anglers. I entered as a co-angler, kind of get a lay of the land and learn these bodies of water that I don't know, would have no experience on. But a lot of guys start as a co, because like you said, a bass boat is not a small price. You're talking 50 grand on up to get. I'm sure you can find an older used one for less, but most of the guys out there, they have at least 50 grand into their boats, and that's tough for a lot of people. That's a big commitment. So I definitely think if you want to try tournament angling, the best part is to start as a co and see how you like it, because, once you step up to the world of the boater, it's even a larger commitment for the boater, because they get there, 7 days early, practice, get their spots, map the water. It's a big commitment to go boater, and a good bit of money's involved. But a lot of guys will team up and travel together to split the travel expense costs, and that helps. But the co-angler side, like you said, that's something I didn't know existed until my buddy told me. And it's great. It can be tough sometimes because you're fishing from the back of the boat, but if you're a good fisherman and know what you're doing, I mean, you can catch and do well.
Yeah, I've been, obviously you're my cousin, so we talk almost every time you have a tournament and anytime we go fishing. But from your Instagram page, which we can link to at the bottom, saw a little bit about what your life on the tour was, and I looked at some of the weigh-ins, and I got to see it from a whole nother angle, and it was intrigued me. And I don't think I'd ever want to do a tournament necessarily. I don't think that's the type of fishing I enjoy. Plus I might Hulk out on someone if, they, try and screw me, like some of the stories you've told me. But so you've dealt with some interesting situations, and I think it's funny that a lot of your, we'll call them cohorts or, fellow anglers in the tournament, you all kind of got close. And it's interesting that there's this kind of camaraderie that exists among these bass fishermen and yourself. So do you have any like funny stories that you could tell just about, life on the tour, so to speak, or like life at the tournament, what a day is like when you're there?
Well, it can be very humbling. One of the things is, I always say that, you'll hear guys say they have a great practice, they're there for 5 days, 7 days, and they have a great practice, and they're all on fish, and then come tournament day, those fish are gone. And then, you'll have the boaters who say, I've been here for a week, it's been terrible, I haven't caught anything. And you guys will go out there tournament day and smack them. It's definitely humbling. But the camaraderie is really there. Everybody I've met so far has been nothing but great, amazing guys, women too, fish it. And really, we're all out there, for each other. And it's just, it's hard to explain the camaraderie ship, or however you say that word. It's just, the guys are there for you.
Yeah.
Like I said, everybody I've met has been just awesome and great. And I've made some good friends along the way. And it's a funny stories, not too many, because when, once tournament day comes, you're both out there just plugging away, say takeoffs at 7 or 6:30 and you're due back in at 2:30. That time flies like that.
And how many times would you say you cast in a given day, or how many throughout the tournament, and how many times are you changing? So this is something that I found interesting is, I've always only had one rod, and, guess it's perks of growing up.
That makes life easier, not to second guess yourself. But, so with tournaments, like I'll go back and study past tournaments, and kind of see what people did in the past, not so much the year before or the week before, but several years back, and kind of build on that. So the co is, I think the limit for rods, they say a co can take 8. The boaters have all their rod lockers filled with 20, 30, 40 rods all rigged, ready to go. And they'll probably 4 or 5 on deck. But the night before, I'll rig up 6 rods with what I think I'm going to throw and go from there. A normal tournament, I don't know, I would say at least 1,000 cast. I mean, you're just constantly casting, just covering water or presenting your bait to the fish as much as possible. Give yourself the best chance to get those 5 fish in, and then go from there.
How are you choosing what you're throwing on a given day?
Time of year, what the fish are eating, try to key into, you always hear people say match the hatch, which is basically saying, match what they're eating. If they're eating crawls, what color are the crawls? Experience a lot of it. And other parts of it are just being out there and paying attention to the surroundings, like springtime, the fish are going to be on bed, getting ready to spawn and then being on beds, etc. And just, the internet's a great tool too. Like, if you're going to a body of water you've never known, because you got YouTube nowadays, and you can go on there and gain some knowledge from that, but you can't put all your faith in that, because any fisherman will tell you it changes daily. You could think it's this and it's something completely different and out of character. But
you don't think it's at all nefarious? Some guys posting things that aren't necessarily true, or some places that may not exist.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. Like during weigh-ins, like if it's a 2 or 3 day tournament, you'll even hear the pros say it when they weigh in. They'll, oh, what were you catching them on? People always say a Cinco. It's just they don't want to give up what they're catching them on. Everybody's got their own thing. One of the things I've heard people say, and I kind of live by, is fish what works for you. Don't necessarily go to the body of water and you can read that everybody says, throw a chatterbait, black and blue with blah, blah, blah trailer. That might not be your thing. If you're catching fish around the country throwing, a swim bait, then stick with that if that's your thing sometimes. But definitely switch it up if it's not working, but kind of stick what's in your wheelhouse and what works for you.
That's a good point. I think that goes with any kind of fishing. And that's what I've learned is, I've begun doing that kind of species around the world here in New Jersey, and trying to catch as many species as possible, specifically on the fly rod. And I remember I was fishing a river, which I don't blow up spots, so I won't do that. And I was pike fishing. And I got out of the water and I did okay. I caught a pike. I was happy. Caught a couple bass. I was very happy about that. And I got out of the water and the guy looks at me at the dock and he goes, oh, how'd you do today? I said, I caught I think it was like a 26-inch pike, which is fine. They do have some monsters in there, but I was happy. It was the first time I caught a northern pike. And he looks at my rod and he goes, you caught him on that? And I said, yeah. And he looks at closer and he looks at the fly and he goes, why did that work? You're like, well, it's, I'm very comfortable with what it was I was throwing. And I was very comfortable at that point with my rod. Now I use predominantly a 6-weight for pretty much everything that I do fly fishing. Of course, smaller streams, I use my Tenkara, but I feel like my 6-weight is very strong and I can fish it very well with some of the flies that I use.
Yeah. Look at somebody like David Dudley. I think he's fishing the MLF right now. He's made over $4 million and you can guarantee every tournament he's throwing a Cinco, He sticks to his strengths. He'll have tied on other baits that, that match that time of the year, but predominantly his fish catches are coming on, finesse fishing. He's made his living off that. It's what works for him and goes with it. And you'll even hear, like I was watching Bassmasters a couple weeks ago, and a guy named Frank Talley won it. And he was talking about his first year on the Elite Series, and he was saying that he would go to these lakes and throw what's expected to be thrown in these lakes. And he had a horrible rookie year. And then his second year where he came in and he's like, I just fished to my strengths. And he's been having a great year. And I think that's a big part of it,
Yeah. Well, let's say you literally said the same thing to me when I was asking you what I should be using. I've been doing a lot of smallmouth bass fishing, of course, this summer, which is It's so much fun. And I found it funny that, you are supposed to use certain things. Like this one river I went to, and I would go with my buddy Mark, and everything you would read and everything he would say is like, throw a Senko with, something on it to, really spark the bite. And I, when I would use my spinning rod, right, I would bring my ultralight, which I love using ultralight and getting the fight and
Yep.
catching a dinosaur. But I found that it didn't work for me. I do really well with rooster tails. I do really well with chatterbaits and swimming baits. I always have fished them as long as I've lived in. That's ocean fishing. That's poppers. I live on poppers. As far as
I love poppers.
Yeah, I love the top water bite. It's just there's nothing quite like it. Um, but outside of Florida, I've never had any luck with Senko fishing until you kind of showed me a few things and gave me a few tips. And then, for those non-weedy bodies of water that we've fished, like I've done very well on it.
So I Senko, I don't have the patience for it. Throwing away weightless Senko because it seems like it takes forever to me, but
yeah,
that's something a lot of people love to throw. The first two events I ever fished were Oneida Lake up in New York in the St. Lawrence River, and drop shot's huge up there. And at that time, I never threw a drop shot. I was more like you, swim baits, poppers, chatter baits, moving baits. I was more of a power fisherman.
Yeah.
And that was something new to me. So, what I did this year, well, after those two events, I was determined to learn the drop shot and master more finesse fishing, which once you master it, I mean, it puts a lot of fish in the boat. It really does. But that's something I didn't have before, and it's good. It's really good.
And I know, like, there's times where I've called you or messaged you after fishing, like when I went up to Lake George this summer, and I brought the fly rod. I was like, I'm gonna catch a salmon, landlocked salmon on the fly rod. It's going to be excellent. One of my unicorn fish that I've been chasing here in New Jersey, and just have had no luck. But I got up there, I casted for maybe an hour, and I was like, man, I wish I brought my my finesse setup because it would have been perfect for it. And I caught some rock bass, which was fun because it was on my target list for the year that I hadn't caught yet. But I didn't nearly catch anything that I should have, or the amounts, because I know they were there, and I could see the bait fish jumping. And when you really spend a lot of time on the water, for those of you who don't fish, it's like you start to notice these things, these like little movements, the way that the wind's moving, these little bait fish, the insects, and you've got to pay attention to it, and it's all there right in front of you. It's actually kind of magical to watch, right? That's the beauty.
That's one big thing. You can't teach. Time in the water kind of trains your eyes. You'll key into things that you didn't see before, like you said, bait
right.
fish, bluegills up in the beds. It's just something you don't notice without time on the water. And I know that can be tough for some people with work and everything like that, but to me, in my opinion, a big part of proving your fishing is just getting out there and putting the time in, like any other sport.
Yeah.
Fishing's a little different because, you have other live species you're going after that has a mind of its own, which can make things tough. But
right.
that time in the water really opens your eyes to things, most people would miss that could key you into what those fish are eating or what they're doing. It's beautiful. Once you start seeing that, it's eye-opening.
Well, so I obviously, with the canoe, it's been an interesting task, especially fishing by myself on a two-person canoe. But even with the fish finder that I haven't set up yet and put on the boat yet, because I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with it or where I want it mounted, I took Donna fishing, and my wife has been very patient with with my antics over the past couple months, right? But she's come bass fishing with me a number of times, but we were targeting, of course, landlocked salmon again, and then lake trout, which weren't in season to keep. But I'm not I'm a catch and release or catch photo release fisherman for the most part. And we were up at this reservoir fishing here, and you would get lost if you didn't look for the signs. You would be completely lost as to what was going on the water. I mean, it was breezy, which is always fun when you're in a self-powered vehicle. And it was my second time there, so I had a little bit of a lay of the land. I had my map of the lake, and I knew the depths, where the ridge lines were and everything. And I said, okay, well, based upon research in the state of New Jersey, I don't know if Maryland does the same thing, but does a pretty good job at kind of explaining to you where to find fish and what to use to get them. So we were jigging right along this ridge line that I was watching these big birds that they have there just kind of crash landing into the water every so often and diving after bait. And I said, okay, well, that's where we're headed. We're headed right along there because the bait fish are attracting these birds that are feeding on them. And sure enough, I caught my first lake trout. I was super excited. A nice 12-inch lake trout, beautiful, released without any issue. About 5 minutes later, I'm trying to fix a snag that I had in my line, and Donna's like, Michael. And I look over, and her rod is just, completely bent over. And she caught a 24-inch lake trout, this monster. And she goes, it's amazing that you can do this without knowing where they are. It's like, well, you don't really necessarily need the fish finder to do that. I mean, it helps.
It helps a lot, but
absolutely helps.
Right.
But you're not going to catch fish every time you go out. No. It's not going to happen. I mean, there might be some people who would disagree with me, but I was trout fishing last week, and I know there are fish there, and I just couldn't match it for whatever reason, or they weren't biting because of weather patterns or some unseen, unknown phenomenon us humans haven't quite figured out yet.
Fishing's very humbling. I mean, the best guys will go out and not catch fish on days. I mean, it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
If somebody's telling you they're going out every day, catching fish every day, that's hard for me to believe because, like I said, the best guys can go out in zero. It's even with all those fancy electronics, they'll still zero. Yeah. I've seen guys who have Panoptics and they'll get stuck on a spot where they'll see 6 huge marks and stay there for 8 hours trying to catch those marks and not get them. That's kind of the other side of those new fancy optics and all that you could get locked into that. But the working birds, I mean, that's always a great sign. I know I used to rockfish a lot with my buddy Joe, and all the rockfish guys were always looking for the birds working on the bait. It's the same thing in rivers, lakes. You see those birds eating the bait. Where the bait is, the prey is going to be.
Right.
I always say if bass were larger, they'd basically be like a shark. I mean, they're so aggressive the way they eat. It's insane, and the size they'll eat too. I mean, it's crazy, absolutely crazy.
I caught probably one of the smallest bass I've ever caught in my entire life this summer, and it was maybe an inch bigger than the lure I was using.
Yeah.
It was amazing to watch. Just this thing demolished it, and it fought like hell. It was amazing to see.
So my buddy Brendan lived in California for a while, and out west there's a lot of guys with those real big swim baits, and he went out with us one time rock fishing. He had like a 8-inch swim bait, and he was thrown out there, and these rockfish, like 6-inch rockfish, were attacking it and eating it. It was crazy to see, and the bait's bigger than them.
Yeah.
It's fast, I mean, they'll swipe at baits bigger than them all the time. It's crazy how aggressive they are. It really is.
That's really, you see those posts with guys posting these massive swim baits, and I always thought it was kind of just BS. Like, what could you possibly catch on that, or how do you even cast it? But yeah, you're right. I've watched YouTube videos of guys catching them, and
they catch them. I had a guy. I was fishing the local reservoir one time. And these guys were out there throwing them, and I said, "Do you guys catch it a lot?" And he goes, "No. We usually get one good one. Throwing those big, huge swim baits. They're going for the big, the big one. That's not something just
good.
Not my thing, but
yeah,
they'll catch them. They definitely will.
Well, I was gonna say it kind of reminds me of musky lures, right? Like those massive things, shiny, all sorts of dangly things coming off of it, and they're like $40-$50 each to catch a monster muskie, and you're using the same thing to catch a bass that, and you've said it, they're basically sharks of the fresh water. If they had teeth and they were bigger, they would probably take us down.
Yeah, no doubt. I have no doubt about
that. Yeah. All right, so let's stop here for a minute, and we'll be right back. All right, so that is part 1 of the Hacker Outdoors Man on a Boat episode 1. Thank you for joining us for the past half hour, and if you liked what you heard, please subscribe, leave a comment, and we'd love to hear from you below. Give us a follow on Instagram at Hacker Outdoors and on YouTube at Hacker Brothers Adventures. And Joey McCormick can be found on Instagram at Joey McCormick81. I will put that down in the notes below. Once again, thank you guys for joining, and see you next week.